The soft buzz of morning chatter filled the hallways of Millwood Academy, a prestigious private school known for its academic rigor and exclusivity. Students filed into classrooms, their voices echoing off the polished floors and freshly painted walls. Among them was 15-year-old Layla Carter, a bright and ambitious girl with a love for learning. Layla adjusted her backpack as she entered her history classroom. She was one of only a few black students in the school, a fact she was acutely aware of but tried not to let bother her. She had dreams of attending an Ivy League college and was determined to succeed. "Good morning, Ms. Abbott," Layla said politely as she took her seat. Ms. Abbott, a stern middle-aged teacher with wire-rimmed glasses, barely acknowledged her. "Hurry up and sit down," she snapped, not bothering to make eye contact. Layla frowned but obeyed, taking her usual seat near the front of the class. She opened her notebook, ready to dive into the lesson. "Before we begin," Ms. Abbott announced, her tone clipped, "I want to remind everyone that we're preparing for the upcoming debate on historical justice. Your participation will reflect heavily on your grades, so don't embarrass yourselves." Layla raised her hand. "Ms. Abbott, I was wondering if I could lead my team's argument. I've been researching the topic and—" Ms. Abbott cut her off with a dismissive wave. "No, Layla. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Leadership roles should go to students who can handle the responsibility." The room went silent. Layla's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "But I've been preparing for weeks," she said quietly. "I even wrote—" "Enough," Ms. Abbott snapped, her voice cold. "We don't need your theatrics. Let's move on." A few students exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak up. Layla sank into her seat, clutching her notebook. Her enthusiasm for the class had evaporated. Throughout the lesson, Ms. Abbott continued to single Layla out, criticizing her answers and ignoring her contributions. By the time the bell rang, Layla felt defeated. As she left the classroom, one of her classmates whispered, "That wasn't fair. You should tell someone." Layla forced a small smile. "It's fine," she said, though her heart felt heavy. What Layla didn't know was that this wasn't the first time Ms. Abbott had treated her unfairly, and it wouldn't be the last. But today would mark the beginning of a reckoning Ms. Abbott never saw coming. The following day, Layla walked into her history class with a mixture of determination and dread. She had spent the night revising her research for the debate, determined to prove her worth despite Ms. Abbott's dismissive attitude. Her father, James Carter, had always taught her to face challenges with grace and persistence. "Good morning, everyone," Ms. Abbott said as the students settled into their seats. Her gaze briefly landed on Layla before flitting away. "Today we'll finalize the debate teams and topics. I expect you all to take this seriously." Layla raised her hand cautiously. "Ms. Abbott, I'd like to propose a new argument for my team." "Not now, Layla," Ms. Abbott interrupted sharply, rolling her eyes. "Let someone else have a chance to speak for once." Layla lowered her hand, her heart sinking. She glanced at her classmates, some of whom gave her sympathetic looks, while others avoided eye contact entirely. As the lesson progressed, it became clear that Ms. Abbott was singling Layla out again. She dismissed Layla's answers with sarcastic remarks and pointedly praised other students for ideas that mirrored Layla's earlier suggestions. The tension in the room grew palpable. Finally, when Layla hesitated to answer a question, Ms. Abbott pounced. "Honestly, Layla, if you're not prepared, maybe you shouldn't participate in the debate at all. You're wasting everyone's time." The comment hung in the air like a slap. Layla felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. "I am prepared," she said softly. "I've been working hard." "Enough excuses," Ms. Abbott snapped. "Let's move on." At that moment, Layla's classmate Sarah, who had been silent throughout the exchange, raised her hand. "Ms. Abbott, I don't think that's fair," she said hesitantly. "Layla's been working harder than anyone else. She deserves a chance." Ms. Abbott's eyes narrowed. "Thank you for your input, Sarah, but I'll decide what's fair in my classroom." Layla sat frozen, her hands gripping the edges of her desk. She couldn't take it anymore. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, She gathered her things quickly and walked out without looking back. Instead of heading to her next class, Layla went to the office and asked to speak with the principal. The secretary informed her that the principal was unavailable, but offered to schedule a meeting. Layla nodded and returned to her day, unsure what else to do. Later that evening, Layla shared the incident with her father over dinner. James Carter listened intently, his face growing darker with every word. "That's unacceptable," he said firmly when she finished. "No one has the right to treat you that way, especially not a teacher. I'll handle this." Layla looked up at him, surprised. "You will?" James smiled reassuringly. "Of course. What's the point of being the head of the school board if I can't stand up for my daughter?" Layla's eyes widened. She had nearly forgotten her father's influential role in the school district. Relief and hope washed over her as James stood, already reaching for his phone. The wheels of justice were about to turn. The next morning, Layla arrived at school with a mix of nervousness and hope. She hadn't expected her father to act so quickly, but James Carter was not a man who let injustice slide. She tried to focus on her classes, but the memory of Ms. Abbott's harsh words lingered, making it difficult to concentrate. By the time history class rolled around, Layla felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She took her seat, avoiding Ms. Abbott's gaze as the teacher began her lecture. "Before we start," Ms. Abbott said, scanning the room, "I hope everyone is ready for the debate preparations today. Let's try to stay on task and avoid unnecessary disruptions." Layla kept her eyes on her notebook, determined to remain calm no matter what. But just as Ms. Abbott launched into her lesson, the classroom door opened. Every head turned as James Carter stepped into the room. Dressed in a sharp suit, his commanding presence immediately silenced the room. Behind him stood Principal Henderson, who looked tense but deferential. "Good morning," James said, his deep voice carrying authority. "I'm James Carter, head of the school board. May I have a moment of your time, Ms. Abbott?" Ms. Abbott's face froze in shock. She opened her mouth to respond but seemed at a loss for words. Finally, she stammered, "Of course, Mr. Carter. How can I help you?" James stepped further into the room, his gaze sweeping across the students before settling on Ms. Abbott. "I'm here to address a concern brought to my attention by one of the students in this class, specifically my daughter Layla." A ripple of whispers spread through the room as students exchanged surprised glances. Ms. Abbott's face turned pale. I wasn't aware Layla was your daughter," she said weakly. James raised an eyebrow. "Does it matter? Shouldn't all students be treated with the same respect regardless of their parents' positions?" Ms. Abbott swallowed hard, her composure beginning to crack. "Of course, sir. I treat all my students fairly." "Do you?" James asked, his tone sharp but controlled. "Because from what I've heard, you've gone out of your way to belittle and exclude Layla from participating in this class. That doesn't sound like fairness to me." The room was so silent that the ticking of the wall clock seemed deafening. Ms. Abbott's eyes darted to Principal Henderson, but he offered no help. James continued, his voice calm but firm. "As the head of the school board, I take the treatment of all students very seriously," he said. "Discrimination, whether explicit or subtle, has no place in our schools. Your actions toward Layla have been noted, and I'm here to ensure accountability." Ms. Abbott's lips pressed into a thin line. "I assure you, Mr. Carter, I had no ill intentions." James didn't back down. "Ill intentions or not, your behavior has had a negative impact. Layla is an exceptional student who deserves to be supported, not undermined." Layla felt a surge of pride as her father stood up for her. The other students watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, some even nodding in agreement with James's words. "We'll be having a formal discussion about this matter later," James said, glancing at Principal Henderson, who nodded in confirmation. "In the meantime, I trust you'll reflect on how you conduct yourself in this classroom." Ms. Abbott nodded stiffly, her expression a mix of embarrassment and defeat. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I understand." James turned to Layla, his expression softening. "You deserve better than this, Layla, and you'll get it." Layla smiled, her confidence restored. Thank you, Dad. With that, James exited the room, leaving a stunned Ms. Abbott and a roomful of students who would never forget what had just happened. The classroom remained silent for several moments after James Carter's departure. Ms. Abbott stood frozen at the front of the room, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly together. The students, who had been watching the scene unfold like a live drama, exchanged furtive glances and whispered among themselves. Layla, still seated near the front, felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Relief, pride, and even a hint of discomfort swirled inside her. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but the support from her father had reignited her confidence. Finally, Ms. Abbott cleared her throat, though her voice wavered slightly. Let's move on, she said, trying to regain her authority. We were discussing the debate structure. A hand shot up from the back of the room. It was Sarah, one of Layla's classmates. Ms. Abbott, I think we should address what just happened, she said boldly. Ms. Abbott frowned. This is neither the time nor the place, Sarah. With all due respect, Sarah continued, undeterred, I think it is. Layla deserves an apology for how she's been treated. The class murmured in agreement. Several students nodded, and a boy in the second row chimed in. Yeah, she's always prepared, and you never give her a chance. Ms. Abbott's jaw tightened, but the pressure from her students was palpable. She turned to Layla, her expression a mix of reluctance and discomfort. Layla, she began, her voice strained, if my actions made you feel excluded or unfairly treated, I apologize. Layla looked up, meeting her teacher's gaze. The apology felt hollow, but she decided to take the higher road. Thank you, Ms. Abbott, she said simply, her tone steady. I hope things can be different moving forward. Ms. Abbott nodded curtly, clearly eager to move on. Now, let's get back to the lesson. But the energy in the room had shifted. The students weren't as engaged, and Ms. Abbott's attempts to carry on with the lecture felt forced. Layla, however, sat taller in her seat, her confidence restored by the support of her peers and her father. Later that day, in the principal's office, James Carter met with Principal Henderson and Ms. Abbott to address the issue formally. Layla wasn't present, but she knew her father would handle the situation with the same resolve he had shown in the classroom. Principal Henderson turned to Ms. Abbott, his tone serious. Ms. Abbott, this isn't the first time we've received complaints about your behavior. Mr. Carter's concerns highlight a pattern we can no longer ignore. Ms. Abbott shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I understand, Principal Henderson. I'll do whatever is necessary to make amends. James interjected, his voice calm but firm. This isn't just about amends. It's about creating an environment where all students feel valued and respected. I expect a concrete plan for how you'll change your approach moving forward. Principal Henderson nodded in agreement. We'll be monitoring your behavior closely, Ms. Abbott. Any further issues will result in disciplinary action. Ms. Abbott nodded, her expression subdued. Understood. In the days following her father's intervention, Layla noticed a significant shift in the atmosphere of her history class. Ms. Abbott, while still stern, no longer singled her out or dismissed her ideas. It was clear that the meeting with James Carter and Principal Henderson had left an impression. One morning, as the class prepared for the upcoming debate, Ms. Abbott called Layla's name. Layla, I'd like you to lead your team's argument, she said, her tone measured but sincere. You've shown great initiative, and I think this will be an excellent opportunity for you. Layla was momentarily stunned. She glanced at her classmates, who gave her encouraging smiles, and then back at Ms. Abbott. Thank you, Ms. Abbott, she said, her voice steady. I won't let you down. The debate preparations moved forward, and for the first time, Layla felt truly seen. Her ideas were met with enthusiasm, and her teammates rallied around her. The debate itself was a resounding success, with Layla's team presenting a powerful and well-researched argument that earned them first place in the class. Later that afternoon, as Layla packed up her belongings, Ms. Abbott approached her desk. Layla, she began, her voice softer than usual. I wanted to say that you did an excellent job today. Your leadership and preparation were impressive." Layla looked up, meeting her teacher's gaze. For the first time, Ms. Abbott's words felt genuine. "Thank you," Layla said simply. Ms. Abbott hesitated, then added, "I also want to thank you for your patience with me. I know I haven't always treated you fairly, and I'm working to do better." Layla nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I appreciate that, Ms. Abbott. I hope things can change, for everyone." "They will," Ms. Abbott promised. "It's never too late to grow." At home, Layla shared the day's events with her father. James listened intently, a proud smile spreading across his face. "You've handled this with such grace, Layla. I couldn't be prouder of you." "Thanks, Dad," Layla said, hugging him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you." James chuckled. "You've always had it in you, Layla. Sometimes people just need a reminder of what you're capable of." Ms. Abbott's behavior continued to improve, not just toward Layla but toward all her students. Over time, she became more open-minded, learning to value the diverse perspectives in her classroom. Layla, meanwhile, thrived, her confidence growing with every challenge she overcame. As for James Carter, he remained a steadfast advocate for fairness and equity in the school district, ensuring that no student would have to face the same struggles as his daughter. Layla's story became a turning point, not just for herself, but for everyone involved, a testament to the power of standing up for what's right and believing in the potential for change.